Hugo, who said, he who opens a school door closes a prison. Our school doors have been closed for some time now. I'm Damien King, and I'm the Executive Director at the Caribbean Policy Research Institute, CAPRI. CAPRI is an independent think tank devoted to evidence-based research towards improved public policy making in Jamaica and the Caribbean. We tackle many important issues at CAPRI, and today we tackle what is possibly the most important of all these issues, which is education. This is the last of a larger project in which we have been examining the effects of the pandemic on various aspects of the economy and society. All of the others are on our website at capricaribbean.org, and I urge you to go and have a look at them. Today, as we talk about the effects of the pandemic on the educational system and the challenge we face right now in trying to reopen our schools, we are going to, this evening, have a report which is going to be presented to you by CAPRI researcher Stephanie Sewell. Following that, Dr. Diana Thorburn, our Director of Research, will moderate a discussion with the Honorable Minister of Education, Favour Williams, and the newly installed President of the Jamaica Teachers Association, Mr. Winston Smith. We hope that this report and the discussion that follows will help to open the school doors and thereby close some prisons. We do this work in particular, with the support of the government of the United Kingdom. And to bring some remarks on this occasion is the acting UK High Commissioner, Mr. Daniel Shepherd.
Thank you, Dr. King. This evening's event is the final presentation in a series of 5 research papers which the Caribbean Policy Research Institute, CAPRI, has produced with the support of the British High Commission in Kingston on the impact of the COVID pandemic on Jamaica and the wider Caribbean. Our support to CAPRI complements other support we have provided to Jamaica since the pandemic began, amounting to £1.6 million to cope with both its immediate and secondary effects. In addition, our contribution to the supply of vaccines to Jamaica through the COVID-19 Vaccines Global Access, or COVAX facility, was supplemented by an additional 300,000 doses directly provided to the government to support Jamaica's vaccination program. The High Commission has had a long-standing relationship with CAPRI, in which it has supported research on critical development challenges facing Jamaica. We have been pleased with our partnership, which generates data and evidence to facilitate informed debate and supports effective policy making. It is our hope that following this launch, stakeholders will critically examine the report, discuss its findings, and arrive at conclusions which will inform actions that will make a positive difference to the lives of Jamaican children and the education system as a whole. On behalf of the British High Commission, I wish to thank CAPRI for the work undertaken in this and the 4 previous studies dealing with the impact of the COVID pandemic on tourism, domestic and community violence, vulnerable persons, and communities. Thank you also to the lead researchers, the moderator, and the panelists with us this evening. I look forward to a stimulating discussion. Thank you.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Diana Thorburn. I'm the Director of Research at CAPRI. And this evening's proceedings, as Damien had already said, we're going to have the presentation by Stephanie, followed by a panel discussion with our 2 very esteemed panelists this evening. I'm going to hand over directly to Stephanie, who's going to go straight into the presentation timeout.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. In one survey conducted in Jamaica, 22% of the poorest households surveyed indicated that their children's education had been halted as a result of the pandemic. Pre-COVID-19, Jamaica struggled with an inequitable education system. Children from rural communities and those from vulnerable urban communities have been at a disadvantage as compared to urban students because their attendance and participation and performance in education have been affected by several factors, to include access to learning resources, household deprivation, to include food insecurity, and transportation, which is one of the largest household costs to education. On March 13, 2020, all schools were ordered shut, public and private, after confirmation of the first case of COVID-19 in Jamaica. The pandemic is estimated to have affected over 600,000 Jamaican students. We used a range of qualitative techniques, including key informant interviews and focus groups, to assess the impact of COVID-19 on students and teachers in Jamaica, in urban, rural, and vulnerable urban communities. Students, teachers, and school administrators were frantic and anxious. Students in focus groups recall on the last day of school, campuses, school grounds being chaos. There being chaos on school campuses after the announcement that schools were shut was made. Teachers were also anxious. They were anxious for their own well-being, for their health, but also for that of their students, especially for those who are already behind, not knowing when they would see them again. The ministry intervened by providing some options and resources for remote learning. But still, many students were disconnected from their schools and so were left academically unstimulated for long periods of time. Schools and teachers had little to no experience with distance learning before the pandemic. Schools and teachers were not prepared for the abrupt switch from in-person learning to online or remote learning, though training was provided by the ministry after the announcement was made. Teachers engaged in emergency remote training. Options for emergency remote teaching, rather, included lessons on radio and on television. There were assignments and test kits handed out, as well as by social media, using WhatsApp, Facebook, and other resources that were at the teachers' disposal. Many teachers in focus groups, however, reported feeling overwhelmed with the additional workload of having to redesign and convert and deliver lessons online, as well as frustrated from the constant calls from students and from their parents who disrespected their boundaries and would call them at all hours of the night and into the morning, leaving them no choice but to turn off their phones or to secure an additional phone for the purposes of online learning. They were also distressed by their inability to connect and meaningfully engage with students remotely. This led one teacher to say, "So even though, as teaching, when it was time to question, I felt like I was hearing crickets, like it was pulling teeth, getting them to have two-way communication. So they're just there sometimes, and at times I feel like I'm just talking to myself." What we've realized is that less resource schools who were already at a disadvantage were worse impacted. As was observed, the haves and have-nots of technology became the haves and have-nots of education. School at home requires a suitable learning environment. Such a space is ideally comfortable, quiet, and distraction-free, where a child can sit at a table or a desk with compatible devices and a stable internet connection. Also, parents who can work from home, parents who had the capacity to help students with the schoolwork were at an advantage. The presence of all these variables, as you can imagine, in one home are more likely to be found among households in the upper socioeconomic quintiles as compared to poorer households, and especially multi-person households. Within vulnerable communities, almost half of the households surveyed did not have access to the internet, and 20% of them did not have a suitable device to facilitate remote learning. Students with disabilities were already at a disadvantage, and during COVID, missed out on resources available through face-to-face, including learning coaches, shadows, therapists, and a daily routine tailored to them by developmental specialists. They, most of all, stand to risk losing out on progress towards higher levels of social and cognitive development as a result of this disruption. Children with disabilities are not only more dependent on face-to-face learning, but they're also least likely to benefit from distance learning solutions. Some of the greatest challenges for households with students with disabilities related to parents not having the skills or the technology or understanding the software that is used to provide the stimulation that these children need. And also the frustration that they face in not understanding the emotional needs of students with disabilities sometimes, and having to consistently monitor them during online learning. Another fear, not only for students with disabilities, but for all students, is the emergence of new behavioral issues or new learning challenges, which is especially concerning for students who may have been at risk of falling behind even prior to the pandemic. In other cases, 1 out of 5 parents seldom or never monitored their children's remote learning. Let that soak in. Unsurprisingly, some students in focus groups said that this period was basically a holiday. Sleeping through morning classes, not being focused in classes, not understanding or learning what was being taught in the new remote modalities, and some attest to having experienced learning loss. Learning loss stands to be the single greatest impact of COVID-19 on education. It's usually measured using a diagnostic tool. For example, the diagnostic assessment that was used by the Ministry of Education to try and assess the learning gaps of students. Unfortunately, there was no baseline assessment that was done, leaving this assessment uncomparable to anything previously done, though the ministry did indicate that there were learning gaps for students across the grades 4, 5, and 6 levels. However, we can use the ability test that was done before the pandemic hit and the ability test that was done during the pandemic in February 2021 and in February 2020 for the grade 6 students to show that there has indeed been a reduction in student performance. What we saw is that there was an 8 percentage point decline in the performance of students in the ability test using the mean score. In 2020, the mean score was 60% compared to 52% in 2021. At the secondary level, while we don't have the results to analyze the learning loss, what we can identify is that there were declines in the number of students sitting national and regional exit examinations, including the NCTVET and the CXC examinations. Otherwise, or apart from the learning loss, we can see that school closures can also have impacts on other areas, such as causing weight gain and other diet-related illnesses, including diabetes and hypertension. Students have also been impacted by increases in hyperactivity, indiscipline, sadness, loneliness, frustration, and anxiety, leading Caribbean pediatricians to write a statement 1 year in the pandemic saying that they believe that they are on the cusp, or we as a region are on the cusp of a regional childhood obesity emergency and mental health emergency. This is exacerbated by the lack of or reduced access to guidance counselors and other in-person coping mechanisms for students. Higher screen time, such as with using online learning, can cause issues to do with eye health and distractibility or lack of focus, and less emotional stability for students. 43% of Jamaican students reported having trouble focusing, and this was supported in the focus groups. There may also be increased absenteeism and higher dropout rates as a result of financial stress, disinterest by the students, as well as in some cases by the parents, as well as lack of access to remote options. School closures meant additional risks of disengagement or detachment for boys and for all students from positive social institutions, which also exacerbates the risk of involvement in gang activity or in criminal behavior. We already know this from CAPRI's stress test, the report on COVID's impact on violence, that preteen boys and teenage boys who had no devices were dropping out of school, forming cliques, carrying knives, smoking, gambling, and getting into fights. Girls are also at a higher risk of abuse and sexual exploitation when not in school. Pregnancy is the highest risk factor for dropout, and teenage pregnancy accounts for 49% of female dropouts before grade 11. Furthermore, 51 out of every 1,000 girls in Jamaica between the ages of 15 and 19 gets pregnant. The Women's Center of Jamaica Foundation recorded a 22% decline in the recruitment of adolescent mothers to their program, leaving doubts about the rates of teenage pregnancy during the pandemic, as well as the well-being of teenage mothers during this time. All of the above disproportionately affect children from disadvantaged homes. While we recognize the improvements that have been made for both students and teachers over the last year and a half when it comes on to having real-time lessons and standardized online learning environment, our primary conclusion and recommendation is that face-to-face learning is crucial. We believe that steps should be taken to have this done. COVID testing regimes for teachers as well as students should be instituted. Surveys of infection and positivity rates for communities surrounding schools should be undertaken, and alternative locations such as church halls, community centers, and other larger locations should be engaged to be used as classrooms to allow for social distancing, as well as to reduce class sizes where possible. But we realize that this may not be possible right now, so we have some recommendations to just make remote learning a little better. For example, establish and support smaller groups of students. Use the learning pods as a methodology for remote teaching. Continue to expand the internet infrastructure and internet access across the island. In addressing learning losses, grade teachers should be obligated to review the syllabus for the remote learning year. This should include recalibrating the pace of the current year's syllabus and extending the school year to complete the syllabus as necessary. Training teachers or student or pre-service teachers should also be deployed to assist supporting students who may have fallen behind. Furthermore, availability of current and relevant data was a huge, if not the hugest challenge in conducting this research. And this wasn't a function of the pandemic. It is a pre-existing and systematic weakness of the education system that must be corrected if we are to understand the realities that are faced by Jamaican students, teachers, and other stakeholders, and to make informed decisions to address their issues. We believe that there should be an introduction of an island-wide survey with the purpose of identifying the status of each student who should be in the education system. A student management system is a recommendation that has been on the books for a long time, in excess of 2 decades, some persons say. This needs to be done immediately. We need a student management system. Teachers should also be trained to collect data and to use the data that they collect on their classroom management skills, on learning styles of their classroom students. Furthermore, we should continue to empower schools and teachers. Schools should be allowed to have the autonomy to effect decisions regarding curriculum delivery, flexible teaching modalities, and the use of resources. So much progress has been made over the last months in improving teachers' ICT competencies, diversifying the way that classes are conducted and taught, and in promoting the level of flexible learning for students that we have now. Furthermore, inter-school collaboration has increased over the pandemic, both through formal and informal structures. Formal structures include quality education circles. We need to continue to encourage these sort of structures and furnish them with adequate resources and capacity to foster deeper collaboration across the schools and promote continued sharing of information and best practices. We need to attend to the needs of teachers. Teachers should continue to do their professional development and continue to be upskilled, especially as it regards to new technology and new techniques for remote learning. More and better material support needs to be provided to teachers. Teachers should not have to dig into their own pockets in order to find the resources, especially the devices needed for remote learning. Even though some devices were provided, this should be a consistent service that is provided This support is needed for teachers on a consistent basis. More and better psychosocial support needs to be provided to teachers. As it relates to children's health and their well-being, we need to continue to expand the cadre of social workers, including guidance counselors in schools and the external psychosocial support that is available to children. Schools should be mandated to have regular physical and non-screen activities, as well as discussions in guidance and other classes on nutrition and healthy lifestyles. More needs to be done to collect data on the particular needs of boys at risk of dropping out, as well as teenage girls who are in vulnerable or abusive households or at risk of unwanted pregnancy. And lastly, on the medium to long term, the Education in Emergencies Plan needs to be updated given all that has been learned locally and internationally over the last year and a half. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. I want to remind all of you who have joined us that we are taking questions on Slido. Slido is an online question app, and you can access it by going to slido.com and entering the code where it says event code CAPRI. You can participate by asking questions, and you can also see what other questions have been asked and vote them up so that the questions that people most want answers to will come to the top of the screen that I have in front of me. There are also 2 polls there. We invite you to take the polls, see how closely you are listening to Stephanie's presentation. If you look on, when you go to Slido, you'll see polls, and then also to where you can put your questions. As we traditionally do in a panel discussion like this, we ask our panelists to give a 3-minute response or their thoughts for 3 minutes on the report. They did receive the report from before, which of course is much larger and more detailed than the presentation that Stephanie just gave. So we would ask them first if they would do that, and then we will go into the questions from you, the audience. Honorable Minister, would you give your 3-minute remarks, please?
Sure. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. Let me acknowledge Dr. Damien King, Executive Director of CAPRI, Ms. Diane Thorburn, Director of Research, Mr. Winston Scott, the President of Jamaica Teachers Association, of course, Stephanie Sewell, who we just heard from, researcher of CAPRI, members of the Diplomatic Corps, persons who are watching, good evening or good night. The Ministry of Education, Youth and Information welcomes the research from CAPRI. CAPRI boasts that they are research-based, evidence-based. They depend on data, and that is a good boast. And we at the ministry like to say as well that our decisions depend on data as well. And so we welcome this research that they have done looking at the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on education and the fact that our students have been away from the face-to-face environment for a long time, considering their age, a year and a half, relative to how old they are, is a really long time. We are equally as interested in getting all our students back into the face-to-face mode. We understand, though, that we're going through a health crisis and that we have to be patient. We work hand in hand with the Ministry of Health and Wellness. We take guidance from them. But while we're waiting for the guidance, we are ensuring that our children or students remain connected to the education sector, that they get their education on different platforms in the online world, audiovisual, the learning kit, and whatever way we can. And I think if you look back over the last school year, yes, while we will agree that we were not able to consistently reach everyone, we did make a significant effort, one, to get devices into the hands of our students, primarily our students who are most vulnerable, our past students. Beyond that, we took action as well to help parents who are needy, are now not necessarily on path to get devices to their children. We helped where we could with connectivity. We paid for data plans for teachers, for schools. We did what we could in terms of ensuring there were e-resources available to teachers and students. And when we realized that there were many students that were not consistently engaged, we sent out our community mobile intervention vehicle. We sent out our social workers, we sent out our teachers into the community to get our students into small groups, engage them. Unfortunately, second wave of COVID came and we had to retreat on that, but we are ready again whenever it is safe to do so to begin that engagement. I believe that the education system responded well, responded in a timely way to what was happening to us. We pivoted and we also, ensured that all persons in the education sector remained engaged and were in contact with our principals, our teachers, and our parents throughout that time. As we enter the new school year, we're still looking at being in the remote environment, but we are going to be doing it better this year. I know last year it was new and innovative, and so Jamaicans gave us some latitude in terms of what we were able to do. I believe in the coming year, they're going to want to see us step up that game. And so our focus in the coming year, until we're able to get back into the face-to-face environment, and even beyond that, is to ensure that those children who were not consistently engaged with the education system, that we know exactly who they are, that we make the necessary intervention for them. And so by the end of the year, we are hoping that we would have caught them up to at least where they were before the pandemic and take them beyond that. So again, we welcome the CAPRI study, and we will be reading it with great diligence to see what we can take from it to help us to manage through this pandemic.
And before I invite Mr. Smith to give his remarks, I'd like to congratulate him for his new position as president of the JTA, and Capri's thrilled that this is your first public appearance as president. So we're honored that we are the platform on which you're going to launch your presidency. Please give us your remarks, Mr. Smith.
And let me greet our honorable minister and Dr. King and all the other persons on the platform, our ambassador from the British High Commission, and to all our listeners, and in particular the teachers of Jamaica who are listening at this time. I greet you well, and I thank you for affording us the opportunity to share in this forum. It was Maya Angelou who once said that we should do our best, and then when we know better, we do better. The pandemic this year would have caused, over the last 2 years, would have caused us to really take an introspection into how education is promulgated within our country and indeed the world. We have looked at the report, and I'm very pleased to see the amount of work that would have been put in by the CAPRI to look at the challenges that would have faced as a country during this pandemic and the impact it would have on education. I'm particularly pleased with some of the recommendations that have been put forward. The truth is, the pandemic took us by surprise. And as I would have said in some other forum, that just imagine flying at an altitude of 30,000 feet. And then all of a sudden, while you're cruising, the aircraft dropped to an altitude of 20,000 feet within a few seconds. This is similar to what the education sector would have experienced since March 2013. No one wrote a playbook or any directive from the Spanish flu of 1890 or 1918 thereabout, when we had that last pandemic 100 years ago. No one wrote down anything to say, should you now have another pandemic, this is what you should do, or this is what we did to keep the education sector afloat. So pretty much we're left at the mercies of our own ingenuity, creativity, and our commitment as educators to the sector. We appreciate the efforts put forward by the Ministry of Education during that time, and we laud them for some of the work that was done. Yes, indeed, my predecessors would have spoken to the need for a rethink and a pivoting of the education system to ensure that our children get the best educational opportunity within the limited time and space under the conditions that we face. And it is heartening to know that though we have had many challenges from the point of view of the educator, there are many good that have come out of the pandemic. We have learned, our teachers have demonstrated their ability to adapt to the challenges and changes within a short period of time. Our students have shown that they have the ability to grasp the concept taught, whether face-to-face or online. The reality, though, is that pandemic shows how inefficient or how far back we are as a nation in terms of getting ourselves ready to take on the fourth revolution, industrial revolution, and to prepare our students to meet the challenges that we face each day. Part of the major challenge we have, and I like where the report has spoken to, the gap between the haves and the have-nots. The reality is in Jamaica, many of our children, brilliant children, fall through because of limited resources. This is not just because of technology or lack thereof, but other challenges that these children will face. Chief among them, financial problems. The gap between those who have the resources to provide all that is needed to carry out or to benefit from education in the best possible way. COVID-19 has magnified it and has brought it to the fore so that the world can see that in order for us to continue the business of education in a meaningful way that all our students get a reasonable chance of success, we now need to revisit the way we go about organizing ourselves. There are many students who are in the parish of St. Andrew. Let's just focus on St. Andrew, for example. There are many students in St. Andrew who have never had access to internet, have never had access to a proper device. There are many students in the rural parts of St. Andrew who suffered significantly because of the lack of the requisite resources in this time. Yes, we understand, and we've seen where the ministry would have provided good support. And I credit the minister for the way in which the ministry would have rallied around and made the necessary adjustment to get things done. But there's far more that needs to be done. The teachers, on the other hand, are suffering significantly because the teachers themselves are placed in a situation where, do I now focus on being a teacher or do I focus on being a parent? Because my children are here with me and they are suffering just the same as the ones who are in our care. And that creates a conflict of self because you have to now focus on being the professional while being the parent. And many times we have children whose the teacher being the parent is not teaching the same subject discipline or even the same school where their children are located. And again, that puts some added stress on the teacher in executing the duties of teaching and educating our nation's children. We are hoping, though, that having gone through 18 months of COVID-19, I am confident that the teachers of Jamaica would have learned tremendously and have gained valuable experience and is now able to take on the business of teaching in a pandemic, provided that we receive the necessary support in a manner that will allow us to effectively execute the business of education. And I'm hoping that having gone through this discourse this evening, then the necessary partners and supporters and the major stakeholders will come on board and support the business of education in Jamaica, because the impact or the effect of what is happening now will not be immediate. But in 10, 15 years from now, we'll start to see whether or not we had managed the situation as best as we could. And that is when it will be too late if we're not careful right now.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. We do have several questions on Slido, and we always appreciate the questions. And I would invite those of you who haven't submitted a question to vote up the questions that are there. The two top questions are with regard to learning loss, or what we pick out in the report is also referred to as missed learning. So not just learning that was lost or concepts that were lost, but things that were not able to have been covered. And I think I'd put this to the minister and then ask Stephanie if she has any thoughts on it afterwards. But where is the ministry at with regard to learning losses and missed learning and the way forward in this new academic year? Not only in this new academic year, but what's the thinking of the ministry with regarding to try and recover those losses and recover all that has been missed in this past year and a half?
All right, thank you for the question. You would have seen that we launched our National School Learning and Intervention Program, NSLIP, towards the end of the last school year. And this was in recognition that we needed to use all the time available to us to help our students recover. So the first thing we had was a national summer school program that lasted through the month of July for face-to-face and into August for online component of it. And through that program, we were able again to connect with a very large percentage of those children who would not have otherwise been engaged or inconsistently engaged. For the new school year coming up, we recognize that our children are going to need more time on task in order to be able to help them catch up. So our National School Intervention Plan has 3 components to it. I mentioned the National Summer Program that has passed. Now into the school year, you have school-based activities. So we would have done an assessment test of the students so that teachers will have a sense of where they are in terms of their learning and can plan accordingly for students, can be able to group them, to be able to teach them that way. But in addition to that, and in addition to what they will get during the normal school day, whether it be in the remote environment in which we are now, or when we supplement that with face-to-face, we will add on top of that our national extra lesson class and our national homework support program. And this is just to help our students across the length and breadth of Jamaica to be able to get support for the concepts that they would have learned during the daytime, whether it's in the virtual world or otherwise, and also to provide extra time for them to engage with their lessons. We all know that learning takes time, education takes time. And if you look back over the many, many decades in Jamaica, extra lessons has been a staple in the education sector. Not because it's an indictment on the classroom teacher, but it's that many parents recognize that their children need more time in which to be able to absorb and continue to stay ahead. Unfortunately, that cost quite a bit. And so what we would have noticed is that only parents with resources were able to access private tutors and private lessons for their children. The government is intervening. And that's why we would have launched the National Homework Support Program and the National Extra Lesson Program for this upcoming school year to enable more of our students to get access to private tutors, if you will, whether it be in the face-to-face or online mode. Obviously, we have to use the technology to allow us to scale it up and to be able to manage the costs associated with it. But we believe that that's a national intervention as a way to help our students begin to recover from what it is that they would have lost during the pandemic and also what they would have missed, according to the question that you just posed.
Stephanie, from the report that, so much of it that we weren't able to cover in the presentation, what else is there about learning losses or missed learning that came out as striking or as important?
Well, what was striking to me is realizing that learning loss sort of takes place on a regular basis. Every summer, the concept of learning loss really came from an observation that during the 2 or 3 months of summer that students are not in school, they do learn, or they do lose just about maybe 1 month of learning during that period. And that the losses are actually more significant in math, in STEM areas in general, than in other areas such as reading and writing. And so what is shocking to me is to imagine that if 2 months or 3 months of summer can cause 1 entire month of learning loss, how much greater loss we can expect after 18 months for some students of not being engaged. And it's really striking to me to see as well, you know, some of the scores that we saw in the diagnostic assessment that was done last year, especially in the math area. I think that would be the most striking, how much learning loss we can expect from the COVID slide, as well as how much more math and STEM areas have been impacted.
Okay. All right. Mrs. Smith, I'm going to put this next question to you, but then also ask the Minister to give her thoughts on it as well. With projections of COVID-19 being here for another 3 years, given global vaccine production and variants, what is the teaching profession's thoughts? What are the teaching profession's thoughts on this? And then I'll ask the Minister what the ministry has contemplated in this kind of a scenario.
As it relates to the length of COVID and the impact of it on our nation, that is something that no human being by ourselves has control over unless we do what is right. If we don't take the impact of COVID seriously, then we will always be in a dilemma. We have the vaccine that is available now, but yet there are many persons who are skeptical and are hesitant to take the vaccine. If we refuse to take the vaccine, then we are actually prolonging the impact of COVID-19 on us. No matter what we seek to do, unless we can cauterize the impact of COVID, then almost any effort put forward would be in vain. Because the truth is, if we are to go online, there are so many uncontrolled variables. Neither the minister, nor the JTA, nor the teachers of Jamaica has control over the internet availability within the country of Jamaica. We can't determine how well internet service is within each local, even within our own homes. And right now, I'm even worried that maybe while talking to you, I may lose connection, yet I have high-speed internet in my home. Now, we can't sit down and rely just on online teaching. And yes, the teachers are willing and ready to go and to do their best online. And as I would have said before, the teachers have learned from last year and they are continuing to learn, coupled with the courses that they would have undertaken from the Jamaica Teaching Council, along with the Flow one-on-one sessions that are coming up. The Jamaica Teachers Association also would have had sessions with our teachers. So the teachers are learning, the teachers are getting ready, but the teachers need to have reliable devices to use as well as reliable internet if we are going to go online. Outside of that, the best method is face-to-face interaction. But face-to-face interaction is impacted by the impact of COVID on the nation. We are asking and beseeching our parents and all well-thinking Jamaicans to take the vaccine and give us a chance to go back into the classroom so that the teachers can demonstrate their skills and competence and, in a way, try to restore our education sector. It will take us some time, but I'm confident that our committed teachers that we have will do whatever is necessary. And I hear the minister's mention of extra class and summer school and these things. Yes, these things have been around from a long time and have borne fruits and will continue to bear fruit. But if we are not in the classroom and if the teachers are not given the resources to execute that job, then all the information we have in our head will always remain there and the impact of learning loss will continue on our nation's children. So I'm beseeching us, colleagues, let us all get our hands and heart and minds wrapped around the realities that we're facing and do what is necessary to get the business of education back on track.
Thank you. Minister, I know it's probably something that is not nice to have to contemplate, but what are the thoughts of the ministry and the leadership of the ministry? Should we be in this situation for another 2 years?
So, Diane, based on the information we have currently, that projection does not have to be our future. We know right now that the vaccines we have right now are effective against the virus. We know as well that it is up to us to take the vaccines and as quickly as possible so that we don't allow additional time to pass for new variants to develop. So that future is in our hands. All of us as Jamaicans, and I dare say globally, we know as well that all of us can only get out of this all of us can get out of it, but we all have to take the collective decision to take the vaccines. That's what we have right now. So, Diane, I don't want to contemplate that future because based on the information we have, we know that we can change that future. But in the meantime, we'll continue to ensure that we shore up the technology that we have, that across the education system, our schools have adequate connectivity, our children, more of our children have devices and have connectivity where they are in their communities, just in case we're here for a longer period than anticipated. But I believe, I have confidence in Jamaicans. They understand the impact that this has had on the economy, on their personal lives as well. And I believe that, and based on what we're seeing now, that Jamaicans are coming forward. Yes, they have questions. And I know in the education sector, we've had many town halls with health professionals to allow persons to ask questions and, and get over that hump or hesitancy that they have. And we're seeing the results of that. When we look at the number of teachers that have been vaccinated, and we're seeing where our students, through the approval of their parents, are stepping forward as well. We're approaching 40,000 students who are vaccinated out of 204,000 students in our secondary school. So we're seeing persons realize that the future that we want to create is in all of our hands. And I think they're taking the steps to ensure that we get out of this pandemic.
Okay, thank you. I have a few other questions here about parents. I'm going to group them together and ask a slightly different question, which I think that we weren't able to answer in the report, and which probably deserves a lot more attention and solutions. And I'll put it to both the minister and Mr. Smith, and also ask Stephanie to weigh in as well. Mr. Smith, what would you say to parents, given what has happened over the last year and with what is to come? We understand, I mean, as I said, we didn't go into it in depth in the research, but we do understand that parents play a huge role in the success of their children's education, and especially now that they're doing their schooling at home. What would you say to parents?
One of the things that I would ask all parents is to really sit back and analyze the reality of the day. And having done so, determine for yourself, what is it that you hope to achieve for your children 10 years from now? If it is that you need to have your child well educated and in a good position, economically, socially, mentally, physically, how do you plan to achieve all of that? And what do you need to do now? And what I would suggest to them is to take the business of educating or education for your child serious. You may not have money, but let's say you are able to have a smartphone. And we know almost all Jamaicans have a smartphone. If you really want to know, put something salacious out there in in the social media space, and how fast it circulates around the country. Maybe 5-10 times within the space of a week. Persons can and they should get serious about your child or children. Become a parent. Sit with them. We know sometimes you have to be at work, but set a system in place that your children understand that they need to be. If it is that we are online, they need to go online. Not just to register their presence, have the device on, and then go on about your own business somewhere else. You can't find them. And that has been part of our experience as educators. The students will come in, log in, register their presence, but they are nowhere to be found. Screen is blank, and they don't turn up again until when it is dismissal time. That has been the experience that we have faced as educators in some instances. So parents need to give greater supervision. They need to check with the teachers constantly to find out if their child is actually doing the work. They need to make sure that the students are properly prepared for class. You see, it is a mental thing. When one gets up in the morning, get ready, just as if you're going to school, sit around your device, just as if you're in a classroom. Because remember, it is school. It's just that the school is virtual rather than physical. So all the necessary preparatory work should be done, and the parents need to guide that process. Yes, you may have to leave to go to work, but leave an instruction to say that the child should do this or do that. And when the parent comes home, check to make sure it is done, and do a follow-up with teacher to find out, Miss or sir, did so-and-so do the work that was assigned? Get involved, give the children the necessary support, talk with your children, because the pressures of online learning may be impacting their minds. And when one listens to the news, the fact that persons are dying, it may also be affecting them. So you have to now address those issues to make sure that the minds of the child is ready to learn and to be receptive to what is available during this time. So parents, we are appealing to you. And I don't even want to underscore again that you go over the fact that those who are of the age to get the vaccine, parents, do your parental duty. Get your child vaccinated so that we can go back to school. Yes, I've seen the figures, as Minister would have said, and yes, it is increasing, and that's very encouraging. But 30-something thousand out of 200 and odd, there's far more to be done. And we're saying to parents, let us get it right, because the business of education is not just that of the Ministry of Education or the teachers, but also that of the parents. And may I add, Jamaicans on a whole, whether it is the private sector, public sector, whomever, we all need to know, gather around this common cause of education and get it going back on track again.
Thank you. Minister, what would you say to parents?
Well, this pandemic has revealed to us in the education sector that there is a significant need for a sustained good parenting campaign, for a campaign that can help to support our parents. They're going through something they haven't gone through before. We all are. And some parents have done better at it than others. But what we're seeing is that from the education sector, we are going to have to help our parents, because we know once we do, the results will be significant. So over the next school year and beyond, we are going to be working with our parents. We're going to be describing for them what is good parenting. We're going to be having conversations with them about not using physical violence on their children, not shouting at their children, not, kicking, screaming. And the statistics are there. We get the calls in CPFSA or Family Protection Agency about the abuses that happen. And we really need to take this on. Yes, there are many good parents in Jamaica. But if you look across the spectrum, we have a lot of parents that need education. And that is what this pandemic has revealed to us. And we see it as our responsibility in the education sector to take this on. And so I want to say to parents, we understand what you're going through. We want you to listen to entities that have information, that have truthful information, the Ministry of Health and Wellness, the Ministry of Education, in terms of helping us all get through this pandemic. The vaccines are an important component of that. Following the protocols are another very important component, and you know what those are, and they're simple and easy. We'd love to see you follow them so that your children can follow them as well. The education sector is here to help you, not only your children, and we want to see greater interaction from you. We want to see it in the home, we want to see it at school, but we know that we need to provide some assistance for you, some guidance, so that you can excel at being, the great parents that you want to be.
You know, we are coming close to our closing, and we have so many questions, and we really appreciate the questions because it says to us that you're interested and you want to know more. And what we have started doing at CAPRI is, after these forums, we do an Instagram live session where we answer the questions that we didn't get to, well, those questions that we can answer that we didn't get to in the actual panel discussion. As we wrap up, I'm going to ask each of the panelists to give me a 1-minute answer on what gives you hope about education going forward. I'm going to ask Stephanie to start.
Wow, Diana, that's it's not really a tricky question, but it's also tricky in that there's so much that gives me hope. I have hope in the fact that we have so many individuals who are invested in our children's education. We have a minister and a ministry who are about the business of change and about the business of impacting children's lives positively. And I've seen a lot of the changes that, you know, have been taking place over the past few months, especially. I feel hope in the fact that there are students who also continue to show potential and aren't dismayed by the current realities, and that even throughout the pandemic, there are students who have thrived, and teachers who have thrived, and, you know, who have been using this as a learning opportunity. And then also just children who have been finding innovative ways to, you know, spend their time. You know, we spoke about children who had been finding other jobs during the pandemic, but students who had also started businesses to do alongside schooling. But generally, I think those are the areas that give me hope, just that there is so much light that remains throughout the pandemic that we believe that we can still emerge and recover from what has been the wildest disruption that I've certainly ever experienced.
1 minute. Thank you, Stephanie. Mr. Smith, in 1 minute, what gives you hope about education right now?
Thank you, Mr. Burnett. In a paradoxical way, COVID-19. COVID has presented me with hope. When we look at what our children are doing today, I've benefited from the experience of traveling abroad and look at education, how children are performing in first world countries. And to realize that emanating from the impact of COVID on Jamaica, our Jamaican children in deep rural parts of this island, who have never even as much as seen an aeroplane close up, are able to perform feats similar to those children in first world countries. COVID has caused parents to become more involved in some regard. And there are some parents who are actually learning. They would have missed out back in the days when they should have been in school. And these parents are now learning. Their content knowledge is improving and increasing because they're so involved in their children's life. And they're actually picking up on things that they would have missed. It also shows us the importance of the teacher in the business of education. And it also shows us that if we really want to move in a positive direction, then the teacher has to become a part of or seen in a more respectful and I'm not speaking to the Ministry of Education now, I'm speaking to the public at large, to show that teachers are valuable. So it has brought to the fore how important teachers are, so that when it is time for us to go back to normalcy, or when we reach back to normalcy, then it will not be the same anymore, because we have recognized the value of the teacher in this dispensation. And COVID-19 has unmasked many of the things that were hidden before, and now is in the open for us to treat with them. And I believe that they will be treated with. And I like what you said. Yes, we have seen some improvement. Yes, we have seen where the ministry has come forward. And I've listened to the minister at our conference, and some of the ideas that she brought to the conference. We're very pleased with them. We're just waiting to see them materialize. And we're still hoping, Minister, that we will have all teachers will have a proper laptop going back to school in September. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Minister, I'm giving you the last word in 1 minute. Can you tell us what gives you hope?
I remain really hopeful, and it's because I see that the education sector is open to change. And the changes that I've articulated, they have been well received. So this coming school year, you will see in our primary schools more specialist subject teachers in the area of mathematics, English, and other areas. This is something that they have embraced. You will see us, or teachers will have access to a repository of lesson plans. We will extend our high schools so that more students can experience sixth form, and not just those students who are doing the CAPE, but we have 2 new programs for students so that they can have another 2 years in the school that they've attended. We have a number of initiatives on the table. I talked about the national homework support, the national extra lesson that we will have throughout the school year. We will continue to ensure that our schools have adequate bandwidth connectivity. We've started that program. It's nothing like we've ever seen before in Jamaica. We're rolling it out now. Schools are being onboarded. We are ensuring that more of our students have devices. And even when we get back in the face-to-face environment, technology is going to remain a very important part of the educational landscape. There are many plans that we have already begun to implement. And when I read reports that were written 10 years ago, 15 years ago, they had some of these same ideas, but they were never implemented. And I think we're at a point now where the education system is ready and open to all these recommendations over the years, but now we are implementing those recommendations. And so I remain eternally optimistic and hopeful for education in Jamaica.
Okay, thank you, Minister. And I am going to turn it back over to Damien to close us out.
Thank you, Diana. And thank you also for moderating discussion. You know, notwithstanding the multidimensionality and the extent of the effects of school closures that we have articulated in this report and in this research, there is no easy walkway to school, to the reopening of schools, and perhaps to the closing of those prison doors. But in that, and in this discussion, we have outlined and promoted a number of steps that can be taken, and heard from our panelists, and especially from the Minister of Education, Youth and Information, a lot of action that is being taken to move us forward. This discussion has given us a sense of the scale and depth of the problem, as well as ways in which we can go forward. I would like to thank the participants, Stephanie for the presentation and the research, Diana for the moderation, and the Honorable Minister, Favour Williams, and the new President of the Jamaica Teachers Association, Winston Smith, for bringing so much to this rich discussion. I would also like to thank the United Kingdom government for supporting this and all of the other research topics in this research series. I would also like to thank all of the good corporate citizens who support the work of CAPRI, particularly Jamaica National and National Baking Company. The executive summary of this report is available on CAPRI's website, capricaribbean.org, as is the highlights of the research in a document called 10 Things About the Effect of COVID on Education. The full report will be published on the website next week. Some of the questions that we did not get a chance to address in this short discussion, we are going to be answering on an IG live session on Sunday afternoon at 2 p.m. So on Sunday, get onto CAPRI's Instagram account and follow and watch that IG live. Our next topic, which we are going to be launching next month, is on the important issue of financial inclusion. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.
I am Dr. Alfred Dawes, medical practitioner and general surgeon. How can you protect your children during this pandemic? Get them vaccinated. It is the best way to protect them from serious illness and hospitalization. Get vaxxed. Get face to face.
We're committed to reducing the impact of disasters occurring in Jamaica. We're ever ready to assist you before, during, and after a disaster. But everybody have a role to play, so make we work together and follow the plan. Whether rich or poor or where you come from, hurricane